Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the PartSource Executive Webinar. Again, I'd like to welcome everyone today. Today's presentation is Lean Procurement Process for HTM, how to buy products faster and increase your team's efficiency. Before we begin, I would like to review a few housekeeping items. Everybody's probably greatly familiar with your control panel. It might be at the top or side of your screen, and you can minimize and expand that panel. You'll also use that panel to submit any questions that you'd like to share with us. In addition to that, there is a chat feature, but again, questions for the Q&A, which we will address at the end of the webinar, should be placed into that Q&A module. And then lastly, everybody who's registered will receive a link to the recording after the webinar. That will be sent to the email address with which you registered for the webinar, and it'll be sent in 2 to 3 business days sooner if possible. So now let me introduce you to our speakers for today. Today we have Dan Brenner, Strategic Program Director at PartSource, and Mara Pare, Vice President of Client Services with PartSource. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about these guys. Mara, she works closely with our leaders in clinical engineering and HTM to design and implement data-driven programs that transform procurement processes through evidence-based solutions to drive efficiency, improve costs, and improve quality. She has more than 10 years in the HTM industry, and she truly understands how to build in-house HTM programs and how to streamline and consolidate your purchasing and vendor management. Also joining us today is Dan Brenner, 16 years, a little bit more than with PartSource. And Dan is our Director of Strategic Programs. He uses his experience to oversee implementations, and most recently he's been working on our new data visualization dashboard. He's consulted with over 40 the leading healthcare organizations, working to help map, analyze, evaluate procurement processes, and improve those processes, including ensuring quality, and in some cases, ISO certification. So now I'm going to hand it over to you, Mara. Actually, prior to, let's talk about really quick the objectives for today. So what we would like for you guys today, all of you attendees, to be able to leave the session with thoughts about how you can quantify your team's true cost of procurement. We'd like for you to learn about how integration of systems can help lower the overall cost of procurement. And you'll also leave the session with having reviewed and validated some actual time motion study results and listen in on how to discuss these real life applications. So Mara, I'll toss it over to you now.
Great, thank you, Colleen. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you all. Today we're going to be talking about time motion study and the impact it can have on your business in a positive way. In order to really set the stage, I wanted to run through a couple of critical factors. I think all of us are well aware that there's quite a few industry issues out there that are impacting our ability to be as productive as we want to be in the HTM field. Several of these we've outlined here just to set the stage and the context for what we're going to be discussing today, and I'm sure these are familiar to all of you. Very often we struggle in our industry with product quality, with getting shipments on time, and with variations in pricing, disparate pricing that we can experience as an organization, even within our sites and within our regions and divisions if we're a larger organization. We have multiple vendors that we use for procurement, and those vendors have different procurement processes. They have different ways to communicate with them, and they have different ways to buy. And so that can often lead, to some unwanted time in the procurement process. Other industry issues that aren't necessarily related directly to procurement time, but impact us just as heavily are things like the utilization of our capital equipment, being asked to keep aging equipment up and running longer than we ever have in the past. And of course, one of the hottest topics in the industry is really just the fact that we have a large part of our workforce that's going to be retiring in the next few years, and that a lot of organizations are focused on putting succession planning in place to ensure continuity of their business. I would say often HTM groups are getting pulled into projects and complex system-wide projects that maybe they never had in the past because they have a bigger seat at the table in their organization. This can be everything from cybersecurity, interoperability projects, to replacement of fleet projects across the organization. And one of the things that we consistently hear our customers also struggling with is just documentation and really solid, accurate data to perform analysis for their organization so they can make operational decisions that are truly data-driven. So, all of this really sets the stage for what we're going to talk about today and why time motion is so important. At the core of what we're talking about in the presentation today is also benchmarking. And in this case, it's getting more data around the usually hidden cost of ordering parts and the role that can play in our benchmarking and in our industry standards for how we evaluate ourselves against others. The industry standard for evaluating equipment maintenance excellence is usually what we call the cost to service ratio, which is the cost of servicing equipment divided by the total equipment acquisition cost, as a primary refresher that I'm sure everyone on the phone and online probably knows. But the challenge is that getting to these costs can be really difficult for a lot of reasons. We wanted to provide you some generally accepted industry norms here, just to set the context that primarily if you're getting your equipment serviced through an OEM, your cost to service ratio is going to average somewhere in the range of 12 to 20%. If you're getting service through primarily a third party, it's typically between 9 and 15%. And lastly, if you have an all in-house model, it's roughly in the range of 4 to 8%. And of course, these ranges can vary based on the service strategy that you've identified in your organization, but these numbers can give you a ballpark estimate to evaluate your own program. And the challenge, when you're comparing benchmarks with others, is that data has to be collected consistently. And that's one of the strengths that we've done here in the work for the time motion studies that were completed and that we're evaluating in this presentation and giving you data on, was that we did it in a very consistent and systematic way in terms of collection of that data and evaluation of the results. So, when it comes to evaluating medical equipment support costs, soft costs that are built into that are an important consideration. They're often kind of the hidden margin breakers in clinical engineering and not something that sometimes people think about. We wanted to share some of the work that Amy's done here in this area. This work done by Ted Cohen, and this table that we're displaying here documents that up to half of support costs are actually related to imaging equipment repair and maintenance expenses, which I'm sure doesn't come as a surprise to anyone here today. But when evaluating soft costs for parts ordering, for instance, it's important to evaluate the time that's spent on each different component of the process. And in order to complete that work, you need to know the cost of the resource that's doing that work. To assist in that end, we're showing here a table that was taken from Ted's paper that was published by Amy, and this data came from the benchmarking tool that Amy has developed. And just to give you some insight here, of over 50 respondents, they determined that hourly in-house maintenance costs of all medical equipment ranged from between $50 to $269, with a mean average of $101. So if you want to get a sense of soft costs within your own organization and don't have ready access to apply your specific technician costs, applying a number between $50 and $100 is going to give you a relatively conservative estimate. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Dan to walk us through why a time motion study is important, and even more importantly, how to conduct one yourself.
Thanks, Mara. So by what we found is that by automating key areas of the product ordering process, you can drive massive efficiency throughout your organization, the entire organization, not just clinical engineering or HTM. Next slide, please. So this portion of this presentation is not going to be an in-depth lesson on lean process engineering or anything like that. although there will be a couple of phrases that we use in there that are lean, such as DMAIC, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. But the most important thing that I want you guys to take away from this is something that I learned from the first time that we did this. The gentleman said that you cannot put technology on a broken process. And that's what led us down the path of doing process engineering with so many different health systems. So next slide. The first step is you got to put together a team of people that are going to help you go through your process evaluation. And my highest recommendation is that you involve the troublemakers, the people who currently complain the most about the current process are actually the people who are most likely to help you and give you all of the details about the problems that are in the process. You should also, if you're working with a national organization or a regional organization with more than one facility, you should involve resources from multiple sites just to validate that each site is doing the same thing, or you'll find that they're actually not doing the same thing. Those are two key variables that you need to know when you're picking your team members. And after you have your team together, you're going to want to do a kickoff meeting. Now, we've seen very bad kickoff meetings, which last for 2 and 3 hours, where everyone sits around a table and tries to describe how they're going to, do this, or the process steps. They'll actually start to try and map out the process in the room. You need to resist the urge to do this. We've tried it, and it does not have as good a results. It's also less efficient. This can be done faster if you keep this kickoff meeting short. The only goal of the kickoff meeting is to keep everyone comfortable. Make sure everyone knows that the end goal of this is not to fire people. As we all know, it's hard enough to get bodies into the department. So just expressing to them that, yeah, we're trying to hire people, man. We can't get enough people in here, so there's nobody at risk. We just need everyone who's working here to do more important stuff. So if you do that, that's a successful kickoff meeting, and then you're off and running. Now you're going to want to go on, you're going to want to actually map this and shadow this at the person's workspace. On the next slide, please. So you're actually going to be at their desk, shadowing them. What we found is that people tend to drastically underestimate the amount of time that it takes to complete a task when they are familiar with it, because when it's muscle memory, you don't really look at the clock and see how long it took you to do something. It just kind of happens. So what you're going to use is Post-it notes, very high tech. I can already tell through the screen that everyone's like, I got Post-it notes. We can get those. Those are in the budget. So you're going to use Post-it notes to record each step of the process, and that'll become obvious as to why we do that in just a minute. But you're going to involve every aspect of the process. That means the sourcing of the parts, calling the vendors and such, data entry into the work order, data entry into the PO system, order placement, order follow-up and tracking, the receiving doc. You're going to want to see what happens there. Involve, invoice reconciliation with accounts payable, or possibly in your own department if that's what you're doing with invoices. But you need to chase the paper. Everything in the process, chase it down, find out what's happening, because these are all little clues that will help you to identify how to move faster in the future. So as you're defining this and you're getting the Post-it note, and as you can see on the screen here, the call vendor for quotes, this is actually a photograph of us doing this on site in a biomed shop, and we used an analog stopwatch. Most important thing about an analog stopwatch is that it doesn't get emails. It doesn't get text messages or phone calls. And while you're doing this, you need to be focused and present so that you can kind of identify when someone starts doing something that wasn't really described on the Post-it note. So as you calculate this, you're going to want to use, the real time, click the button, see how long it takes them. And at the end of that, ask the person you're shadowing, would you say that was a best case scenario, or is that usually what happens? And they will know, and they'll be able to help you fill in your best case, worst case, most likely. So when calling a vendor, for example, your best case scenario, just to get through the initial pickup and press 2 for English and press 6 for the parts department and stuff like that, 90 seconds is how long it actually takes to do just that part. That's not even dictating the part number or your account number or any of the information necessary to get the price from the manufacturer. And your worst case scenario, we've all seen and heard about this. You're on hold with the OEM for 40 minutes trying to talk to somebody, and then finally they pick up. So you're going to want to record all 3 of those times, and then also ask for frequency. Don't just assume that they do this every single time, because what we found is that sometimes the techs just go with the last price that they paid for something. So they just say, oh, well, we just bought this, last week, and we paid $100 for it. But sometimes that bites you, because you need to pay attention at that point, because they might not pay attention to the last date that they bought it. I had one tech that put the same price that they paid for something back in 1997. So pay attention to what's going on. Next step. As you can imagine, you're going to wind up with a whole bunch of Post-it notes from this process. You're shadowing your biomeds, you're shadowing your imaging techs, you're shadowing the accounts payable folks, your purchasing department, your receiving doc. Just keep them all kind of stacked together. And then I find it best to put them on a whiteboard. And on the left side, in your left column, you've got your swim lanes, we call them. But at the top, we've got accounts payable, and then you've got receiving, buyer, clinical engineering department manager, and buyers and such. You might have a clinical engineering admin, and then your technician. And this is how you can create very quickly we use Visio, but there's multiple tools that are out there that you can use to map this into a more professional format if it is necessary, which sometimes it is when you're going to be going to different departments to talk about process changes. From that, you're also going to be able to use another tool called the SIPOC, where on the left side here, we got a supplier, which in this case, the supplier is the engineer. The engineer did the work to figure out what parts he needs. The input description, troubleshot, completed part, and now I need to know, I know what part I need to fix the equipment. So the process is calling the OEM to identify the part number needed, which the engineer still owns. And the output of that is I'm going to have part information. But as we know, the parts department doesn't always give you the price. So sometimes you got to call and talk to a different department to get your price, which is just wonderful. Now you got to sit on hold again. So again, go through that, get all the inputs and outputs of the process defined. Next slide. And at that point, remember at the bottom of your Post-it notes, we've got the best case, worst case, most likely. So from that, you're going to put that into what's known as a PERT analysis. And that's a program evaluation and review technique. Basically what it does is it's a weighted average of those things. So multiply the best case times 1, worst case times 1, and then multiply your most likely by 4, divide by 6, and that's your PERT estimate. So in this instance, for 5 minutes, best case, 45 minutes, worst case, 8 minutes, most likely, the most accurate, scientifically proven time estimate that's used for building houses, for going to the moon, going to Mars, everything. This is what science tells you to use. So it's what we use, is the PERT estimate of 14 minutes. So that's how much time you should budget for that task. Frequency, how often do you perform the task each day? Again, you don't always call the vendor for the price. That doesn't happen every single time. When you're looking at things like problem invoices, you can get a number from your accounting department. They'll tell you how many invoices there were problems on, and you can put that into the frequency. So for one customer, we saw the average time to purchase one product was 63 minutes. That was actually lightning fast compared to most of the industry's procurement process times, which I'll go into in just a second. But once you've got that all defined, you're going to find almost obviously that there are areas where you can easily improve. There are simple things like walking around with paper, right? Like if you print someone's going to tell you, well, I print the order confirmation off and I walk it over to this filing cabinet. And you ask, well, like, what happens after that? And they say, well, I have no idea. And you ask like 5 other people and they're like, no idea. Nobody ever asks about it. Well, how many filing cabinets do you have? Well, there's 47 rows of filing cabinets, actually, of all the paperwork that we've saved for the past 30 years. Not one person come down and asked about it. So this is a waste. And you can validate that really quickly by asking superiors and other departments, do we actually need to do this? And it's just gone. So simple things like that will become apparent. You'll also find by going department to department and looking at this level of detail, you're going to find messages to nowhere. I can almost promise you that some of your technicians are entering a note somewhere in the work order or in the purchase order rec or somewhere that says, you need to deliver this to my office instead of to the receiving dock or something like that, that no one sees. They think that someone sees it, but it doesn't get seen by purchasing, and it doesn't wind up on the PO, and thus the vendor doesn't see it, so the receiving doc doesn't see it, and then it's just a message to nowhere. So you'll find waste like that as well. You'll also be able to do a compliance check, and this is important for most healthcare organizations, if not all of them, that we've worked with. Actually, all that we've worked with, it's been important. But Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, the portion of this that's relevant to us here at Healthcare Technology Management is the separation of duties. So all health systems that we've worked with have had this clause in their procurement process to some degree, but basically the person who creates the need for the part, which is your clinical engineer technician, they're the one that needs the thing. They can't be the same as the person who creates the contract. The contract is the PO. So it has to be a different person creating the PO altogether. Now the technician can create the PO requisition, but they can't create the PO itself. Okay, so after that, the person who receives the product can't be the same as the other 2 people. You need to have 3 layers of the separation of duty here. So the receiving doc needs to receive it in, or in fact, for full compliance, they don't even want someone from the same department to receive it. So the clinical engineering admin doesn't usually count as a separation of duties. So they want complete separation throughout the organization to eliminate the ability for theft and fraud. Next slide. Once you've improved your process and you've defined what you're going to do, you're going to run into the change management aspect of this. And roughly what we've seen is 30% of the people involved in any process change are thrilled to death, and they just do it and they're all happy. And they're like, oh my God, this is so much better. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Once again, going back to that, picking your team, if you've picked the troublemakers, the boisterous troublemakers, and they've helped to actually do this, they will not be the problem. They will be one of the early adopters. So it's very helpful in so many ways to gain buy-in from those folks that they seem like they're the pain in the butt, but really they're some of your strongest leaders, and will cheer the way for everyone else. But that being said, for 60% or more of your users, they're going to go into this and hit the denial phase. In the denial phase, they're like, nope, this doesn't apply to me. And they'll just keep buying things or doing things the same way that they used to. That happens until you basically call them out on it and say, hey, you're not supposed to do it that way. We changed this, we do it this way now. At which point most people will hit some level of the anger and bargaining phases. And they'll complain about everything that happens, every little issue that comes up as though it never happened before. So you'll run into that. And then eventually you get to the acceptance area, but, oh, sorry about that, bumped something. So you go through your stages of grief. Another thing that you can do is create a departmental procurement policy. So your own HTM procurement policy, because as we know, from dealing with everyone in the industry, that HTM purchasing is just different. You're not buying the same box of Band-Aids every single week. It's always different stuff. So creating a departmental procurement policy is a great way to help clarify things with your folks and because hospitals are policy-driven organizations. So if there's a policy in place, then people just tend to follow it. And then eventually you throw away the paper order, blow up the old process, so to speak. So some results that we've seen from this, and we've seen consistent results with every single person that has taken the time to go through this. So I can assure you that it's worth the effort. But one regional nonprofit IDN, they were using a non-system generated PO, often called a blanket PO. They went from 96 minutes when we started the evaluation. And again, I want to reiterate that the 96 minutes is not the amount of time that it took a technician to buy a part. It's how long it took the organization to get the entire purchase completed. So from I need a part to invoice paid was 96 minutes. And after we did all the process evaluation and consolidation and improvement, we were down to 14 minutes. That's using a blanket PO. So it's an 85% reduction in time. Now, another customer, another national IDN, they were using a system generated PO, which intuitively you would think it would take more time to create a PO and in the system and do it, quote, by the book than to use a blanket PO process. But in reality, they went from 84 minutes down to just 90 seconds because the entire invoicing process at the end, at the end of your process was completely automated. So oftentimes what we find with a blanket PO is that you have to do some level of invoice reconciliation and receipt of goods in your own department. So you're taking on processes that are actually someone else's job, like you've taken on accounting's job for them. So in a lot of cases, they're perfectly happy to let you do a blanket PO process. In other cases, they fight you tooth and nail on it. So it really varies widely between organizations. But what we've seen by and large is that the best process, that's okay, you can go to the next slide. The best process that we've been able to create with any health systems, and we've replicated this actually 2 times now. We were able to get it to 90 seconds, and here is the 90-second workflow. So I'm relatively positive that this PowerPoint is going to be available for everyone afterwards. So you don't necessarily need to write all this down, but you start out, the technicians start out in their CMMS, and you would want some sort of integration with a purchasing partner, such as PartSource. We do that so that the data automatically flows into the CMMS work order. The ERP will have your PO system will have automated PO generation out of your CMMS. So you create a CMMS rec and the ERP creates a PO. Supply chain signs off to automate special order approvals for contracted vendors. This is a critical step, and a lot of health systems, if not all health systems, have a quote special order process where the purchasing admin, or the purchasing agent, excuse me, for the health system has to review the thing that you're purchasing because it's not in the item master list in the ERP. So when you need to buy that bag of screws for the MRI or whatever it might be, the ERP doesn't know what that is. So a person has to look at that, and that can cause sometimes upwards of two days in delay. But what we've coached people to do is to meet with their supply chain to explain that you're working with contracted vendors. You've got a policy in place in your department that states that you can't buy from anyone outside of these approved vendors. And these vendors don't sell Bentleys, they don't sell flat screen TVs and stuff like that. These are medical equipment repair parts vendors. They will then sign off on a contracted vendor so that there's no special order approval, and that'll eliminate that step. Automate your PO communication to the vendor. So with GHX or EDI, that is basically an automated email, electronic communication of your PO and invoice information. All that stuff gets just completely automated, and your HTM departments will never have to touch it. So yeah, everything is automated after that. With that, I'll turn it over to Mara, because Mara, unlike myself, was actually a department director for Alina Health and has experience on the other end of doing process engineering.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, to wrap things up here, we wanted to share a couple of real world examples of current PartSource customers that leverage our PartSource Pro program, as well as have done a lot of work internally, similar to what Dan just shared, to really automate and make their procurement process as efficient as possible. So the first example here is Marshfield Clinic, which is an IDN based in Wisconsin. And they were really able to reduce their overall ordering time by approximately 61%, which really resulted in tremendous soft cost savings for them through a few different methods. One, they did what Dan just shared, which is they integrated their ordering process into their CMMS system through a partnership with us, with PartSource. They consolidated almost 500 vendors and all those different ordering processes into one streamlined ordering process. And then they also leveraged looking at where they were doing in-house repairs, and they had the option for flat rate depot repair options that were cheaper than their internal rates, and they could free up technician time for more complex work and more complex repairs. So this was all an internal study that they did where they reduced the part average order time by 47 minutes. And that resulted in this subset of orders that they did this study on in approximately $87,000 worth of soft cost savings. So pretty substantial. The other example is Mayo Clinic, which is of course based in Minnesota, Florida, and Arizona. They completed an extensive internal study of their procurement process, and they went ahead and they implemented an entirely new buying workflow for their technicians that leverages both technology integrations with their CMMS and their ERP, as well as a partnership with PartSource. And through that, they were able to, in essence, reduce their overall order time by approximately 50%, and also, as importantly, get cleaner and more accurate data back into their system with which to be able to make better operational decisions. So with that, we'll just cover the top 3 takeaways here from this webinar. We're really hoping that the information that was presented to you today can give you an idea of how conducting a time motion study will give you a true picture of your team's purchasing productivity and where there can be opportunities for efficiency and cost savings for your organization. That part of doing that time motion study is also then the result of it being that you can implement system integrations as well as find ways to consolidate your vendors that will free up more time, give you back more time for your technicians to take on more value-added work, And I think generally leads to greater employee satisfaction as well when they get to take on the more complex stuff rather than sitting on hold with vendors trying to buy parts. And then thirdly, there's other organizations out there that have done this, that have been successful in it and seen proven results. So there's really no need to recreate the wheel. There's an established process, as Dan just shared, and there's also companies out there like PartSource that will partner with you on that if that's something that you would like some assistance with. So, you know, just to cover a few resources that are out there, and this will be sent out when Colleen sends out all of the webinar resources. There is a Mayo Clinic webinar that goes into quite a bit of detail about how they looked at their process, what changes they made, and the results they were able to achieve. There's also a case study on Marshfield Clinic that goes over the results we just talked about, and a recent journal article in the Journal of Clinical Engineering that really dives deep into the topic of time motion studies that's available for your enjoyment. So with that, I think we are wrapping up, Colleen.
Thank you guys so much for sharing the information. So again, I'm going to post up Dan and Mara's email. So if something comes up after that you think of and you want to send them an email about this presentation or other related questions, feel free to do so. So we'll go to the Q&A. Reminder, if you haven't entered your question, you can go to the Q&A window to do so. Still, we do have time to respond to additional questions. A couple came through while we had started. One person says, we don't have time to do a time study. Any ideas? So either of you can jump in and help respond.
Well, I think I would say to that we understand the challenges that everyone is experiencing right now, especially in the unique situation we found ourselves in the last year and a half with all the COVID-related and pandemic-related needs and stress that are being put on HTM groups. I would just say that it's really important to, as a leader in your organization, set aside time for projects like this, because this is how you actually free up time to do the other work that is so necessary. So it's almost as if you don't have time to not have time to do this. The other thing I would just say is that, as I mentioned at the end here, there are organizations out there that do this for a living, and there's organizations like PartSource that do it with their customers all the time. So you're not alone in this work. There are others out there that will partner with you and provide resources on your behalf to help do this type of exercise.
I could also put some context around the work that was done. It's faster than you think. Like, all that stuff that I talked about doing is able to be done in one day. So you can map the entire process in one day. The following day, you can improve the process. You can map it out and say, well, we could do this, this, and this. So with a grand total of less than 16 hours of investment from one resource. Now, when you're shadowing the process from the people that are going through the process, there actually is almost no delay in their work. I mean, there's a bit, a little conversation back and forth, but they're still working while you're shadowing. So it's not like you have to stop the clinical engineering machine to do this. It's just setting aside a day to go through department, writing up things on Post-it notes.
Along the same lines, another question came through. Is there a suggested number of people for the team to conduct the study, or specific types of people? I guess they mean roles.
Great question. So with some of the processes, it's very simple. You can do it with one person. Calling a vendor, for example, you can see it takes people the same amount of time to dial a phone, basically. Entering data in the CMS, another example, just clock one person. And the key thing you do want to involve is your troublemakers, the people that complain often about the process, the people that are difficult to work with, and thusly will be difficult when you change things. But if you can satisfy their needs, you're going to flush out a lot more problems from them, because we figured out there's nothing worse than involving somebody who's like thrilled to death with the process, because you're like, tell me something you don't like about the process. And they're like, I love everything about this process. I'm nervous to tell you anything interesting. Whereas a troublemaker says like, well, let me tell you about taking this paper and putting it in the filing cabinet. That's the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. You're like, oh, well, thank you for identifying ways in the process.
I think that's helpful. Another one that came in, it was regarding 90-second order. How does this happen? Is CMMS, I'm sorry, specific CMMS? I guess they're meaning, do they need a specific system in order to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, PartSource has partnered with a lot of the CMMS systems in the space and implemented this specific workflow with at least a couple of them, and have active plans to do it with the remainder. And we really partner with our customers on that. And that push from the customers is really kind of what moves the process forward with getting a 90-second procurement workflow in place. So I would say the opportunity is that if it doesn't currently exist with the CMMS system you have, there is definitely an opportunity to make it exist. And the great news is that we have it mapped out in terms of what that development needs to look like and what the perfect workflow looks like. We've done it and replicated it successfully with several CMMS systems already. And we'd be happy to share more offline about what that looks like or could look like with your organization.
Feel free to reach out.
I was going to just ask you guys, ask the experts, just brainstorming after I heard that. But regardless, would you say that there would be other ways to streamline, even prior to that?
Oh, absolutely.
Specific. Okay.
Absolutely. You know, it's not unreasonable to get your procurement process down to 5 minutes without needing some of the more whiz-bang software that's out there. It's absolutely possible. There are people that are running with 8-minute procurement times right now, and that's, again, the entire process. So it takes roughly 5 minutes to enter data into the work order system. Ironically, it takes roughly 5 minutes to enter data into a PO system. So a 10-minute process, also very, very feasible. So even if you have to type it in, it's not necessarily the end of the world. What we found, though, actually, is that all minutes in the process are not created equal, because for the technicians, entering data into a database is like 5 minutes of being on fire. Like they hate it. So, and I know that if I could see your faces right now, you're all nodding your heads like, yeah. But that's why that integration piece is so important. It's actually for employee satisfaction.
Another question just came in. What are you seeing other teams do with extra time they get back from optimizing workflow?
Yeah, I would go back to the industry issues that we started with in the beginning of the session. It's being able to apply that time to all of those other things. So I think specifically we've had customers that were able to redesignate resources in their organization and assign them to special projects that were happening, whether they were cybersecurity related or they were doing, you know, a total fleet overhaul or replacement, patient monitoring, et cetera, replacement of their fleet. Or they've started to insource certain modalities of service and equipment that they didn't do previously. So we've had folks look at insourcing elements of their lab service that they hadn't previously had the bandwidth to be able to take on internally, as well as some higher end imaging equipment.
Yeah, I was going to say contract evaluation and elimination would be some things that we've seen.
Yeah, service evaluation.
Okay, with that, thanks guys. We have answered all the questions that have been submitted. So again, I'd just like to thank both of the presenters today. I'd like to thank all of you in the audience for attending. And then just wanted to reiterate, you'll be receiving the follow-up email with the recording, as well as links to the resources that Mara mentioned before. And again, we'll get that out to you guys just as soon as possible. So at this time, the webcast is ended. Thanks for joining and have a wonderful day.